Hi, today I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Hindol Datta, and I want to tell you why I'm building this platform. What is it really about, and who is it for? For the last 25 years, I've been a CFO. I've led finance across companies with $9 million in revenue and companies with over $200 million. I've worked in cybersecurity, I've worked in SaaS, I've worked in digital marketing, in manufacturing, even in cannabis. I've worked in gaming as well. I've been through startups that exploded from $9 million a year to 285 in 2 years. I've worked at public companies. I've managed the sale of gaming studios to Atari, and we have also done the acquisitions of multiple gaming studios. I spent time at Singularity University working alongside Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil. And through all of it, across every industry, every stage, every deal structure, I kept running into the same problem. There's a gap, a massive, persistent gap in how finance is understood by the people who need to understand it most. I'm not talking about accountants. I'm talking about CEOs, I'm talking about COOs, I'm talking about C-level execs, board members, operations leaders, people who are brilliant at what they do, but who do not study finance or who have not studied finance and who don't come from that world and who are now making decisions every single day that have profound financial consequences. And no one has given them the education they need to think clearly about those decisions. So that is what this platform is going to do. And this is what it's all about. It's not a blog, it's not a content mill, it's an educational foundation for senior leadership in corporate America on the finance topics that actually matter. So let me be more specific. When I say there's a gap, here's what I mean. You have got a CEO who's negotiating their first institutional funding round. And they're staring at a term sheet, and they're looking at terms like liquidation preferences and participating preferred shares and anti-dilution clauses, okay? And they kind of understand what those words mean individually, but they don't really understand what it means for the team 3 years from now, when the company exits. And they want to understand how the cap table will play out. They don't understand what the structure they're about to sign could mean when their employees walk away with almost nothing, even if the company sells for millions of dollars. Maybe you have a chief operating officer trying to figure out why finance keeps saying no to deals that sales are swearing that are good. And the issue is not that the finance is being difficult, the issue is that the deal structure creates revenue recognition problems that will blow up on the forecast. Or it violates an existing debt covenant. Or it introduces customer concentration risk that the board will not tolerate. But no one has explained that to the COO in a way that makes operational sense. So it just feels like finance is a bottleneck. Or let's say you've got a board member who has been asked to evaluate the company's capital allocation strategy, and the CFO is presenting 3 scenarios with different ROIC, return on invested capital assumptions, and discount rates and sensitivities and margin waterfalls, and the board member is smart. They have run companies, but they are not a finance savvy person. And they don't know how to pressure test these models or what the hidden assumptions are, or what questions they should even be asking. This happens all the time. It happens in boardrooms, it happens in leadership meetings, it happens in strategy offsites. And it's nobody's fault. It's just that finance has its own language, its own logic, its own way of seeing the world. And we expect the non-finance leaders to pick up through osmosis, to somehow absorb it by sitting through enough board meetings or investor pitches or audit reviews. Well, that's kind of backward, don't you think? So this is what I'm doing. I'm building a comprehensive educational resource that translates the most important financial concepts into frameworks that senior leaders can actually use. This content is not just for accountants. This content is not generic business advice. It's deep practical education on the topics that shape strategic decisions. Revenue recognition, capital structure, deal desk operations, forecasting under uncertainty, how to think about pipeline as a system and not a spreadsheet, how to design quote-to-cash workflows that do not strangle your growth, how to read a cap table and understand what it means for incentives across your organization. And I'm doing this through a specific lens, a lens that I think is missing from most of the finance education. So I come at this from three intellectual traditions that don't usually intersect in finance. The first one is the Austrian school of economics. I'm a big fan of that school. Thinkers like Hayek and Ludwig von Mises, Karl Menger, they studied spontaneous order in emergent systems, how organizations actually coordinate under uncertainty, not how we wish they would. The second is a theory of constraint. I learned this on a factory floor at GN Resound. It's a medical device company, hearing healthcare device company, where I watched a single bottleneck throttle an entire production system. And I realized that the same logic, it applies to revenue operations. It applies to forecasting. It applies to organizational design. Every system has a constraint. And if you optimize everything at once except the constraint, you just create chaos. The third bigger element is complexity science. There's a big shadow that falls on this. The recognition that companies are adaptive systems, where small changes in the right place can create disproportionate impact, and where linear thinking fails when you're dealing with non-linear dynamics. That lens, that way of seeing changes how you approach finance. It's not just about running the numbers. It's about understanding the architecture of how organizations, they actually work. It's about seeing the invisible structures that connects revenue strategy to cash flow. It links capital structure to team incentives. And it determines whether growth creates capability or does it just create complexity. And that's what I want to share with you. So let me tell you what you'll find here across all of the video sessions in the platform. The platform is organized around the finance topics that I think matter most to senior leadership, having been there. Revenue operations and recognition, how ASC 606, which is the revenue recognition standard, isn't just about accounting compliance, but actually a strategic framework that shapes how you design your offerings and structure your deals. We'll talk about capital structure and fundraising, demystifying the liquidation preferences, sunlight on the participating preferred shares, all the mechanics that determine who wins when the companies exit. Making visible the trade-offs in term sheets and how those decisions, they ripple through your organization for years. We'll talk about strategic finance and planning, moving beyond budgeting exercises into scenario planning, into capital allocation, into forecasting and uncertainty. We'll talk through deal desks. We'll talk about quote to cash, recognizing that the friction between opportunity and revenue realization often determines your velocity more than any marketing campaign or product feature. We'll talk about CFO leadership and systems design, what it means to lead a finance not as a reporting function, but as a strategic intelligence engine. And cognitive frameworks for decision making, discussing things like pattern thinking, lateral thinking, model-based reasoning as tools to kind of navigate this ambiguity that we are facing. Each of these topics is explored in great depth. I don't summarize, I don't give you a surface level overview. I explain, and I try to explain thoroughly. Because my belief is that depth creates understanding, and understanding creates confidence, and confidence, it creates better decisions. So with that said, let me tell you a little bit about my background, because I think it matters for understanding why I approach this the way I do. I've been a CFO for 25 plus years, and have deliberately chosen roles across various different industries. Because each one of those industries, they taught me something specific. At Great Nordic Resound, I learned theory of constraints on a factory floor. At Atari, I navigated M&A complexity during the sale of a gaming studio and even the purchase of gaming studios. At a company called Attractive, I managed finance through an explosive growth period from $9 million in revenue to $185 million in just under 2 years. And that experience showed me how growth creates complexity faster than most organizations can build a capability to handle it. At Singularity University, I learned to think in exponentials, not linear progressions, and to recognize that finance has to adapt to a fundamentally different growth curve in technology-driven businesses in particular. I've also spent time managing finance for a cannabis manufacturing operation. And you know what that taught me? How to navigate the contradiction of state legalization laws and the federal prohibition mandates. Managing a business where banks won't even touch you because the compliance expectations rival pharmaceutical manufacturing, plus more, the governmental regulations. And most recently at Beyond ID, I have integrated commercial contracts, deal desk operations, financial systems into a unified flow and to build an analytic structure. Building the connective tissue between revenue strategy and financial execution has always been my forte. And across all these roles, I've managed teams in the US, in India, Nepal, Asia, Europe. I've implemented ASC 606 multiple times across different business models. I've sat through 14 audit cycles. I've negotiated with banks, investors. I've worked closely with auditors and regulators. And what I have learned is that the best finance leaders are translators. These are people who can move fluently between strategic vision and operational mechanics, between qualitative judgment and quantitative rigor. I also have the formal credentials. I have an MBA in accounting. I have a master's in applied financial economics from Cal State University, Hayward. I'm currently finishing a master's in analytics at Georgia Tech. I'm a CPA, CMA, CIA, PMP, CPIM, have executive education at Stanford and Caltech. I mention all of this not to impress you, but to make clear that what I'm teaching here is not just opinion, it's grounded in deep operational experience and rigorous technical training over the years. So who is this platform for? This platform, it serves senior leaders who need finance fluency. These are CEOs and these are founders who have to renegotiate term sheets and present to boards and make capital allocation decisions without formal finance training. These are COOs and go-to-market leaders who need to understand how revenue recognition and deal structures affect their operational strategies. These are for board members and advisors who have to evaluate a company performance and assess risk through a financial lens. This is for emerging CFOs stepping into strategic finance roles and looking for frameworks that go beyond technical accounting. This is for private equity and venture capital operators who need to diagnose portfolio company issues and implement improvements through financial architecture. So, if you're in any of these roles, this platform may just fit your needs. Now, a few notes on how I approach education here. First, I believe in depth over breadth. I don't give you shallow summaries. I go deep, not to show off knowledge, but to build genuine understanding. You will leave knowing not just what to do, but why it matters and how the pieces connect. Second, I focus on framework over formulas rather. Finance is not about memorizing ratios. It's about building mental models that help you navigate ambiguity. So you learn pattern recognition, you learn scenario thinking, you will learn systems analysis and other core skills. Third, I emphasize narrative over notation. Numbers, they do matter, but stories, they stick. Every concept I teach is grounded in real operational contexts. What happened when we structured a deal this way? Why a particular process failed? How a small change unlocked disproportionate value. The fourth element, I stress integration over isolation. Finance does not exist in a vacuum. Revenue operations connect to product strategy. Capital structure, they shape organizational incentives. The deal desk workflows, they affect customer experience. And what do? I show these connections explicitly. And fifth, I value honesty over hype. I'll tell you when theory breaks in practice. I'll acknowledge when judgment matters more than financial models. And I'm transparent about trade-offs. There are no perfect solutions out there, only informed choices with clear consequences. I should also mention that I'm in the process of writing a few books. And one of the books will be coming out in December on revenue operations. There'll be another one coming out on startup CFO and systems thinking, then on business architecture and complexity theory. And these are the 4 pillar books that basically define the financial education and the standard that we're going to operate from. I'm creating an integrated curriculum of finance leadership development between my blogs, between these videos, and between the books. So why am I doing this? For 25 years, I've had the same versions of same conversation over and over. A brilliant CEO who does not understand why their revenue forecast keeps missing. An operations leader who doesn't grasp why finance is blocking a deal structure. A board member who cannot reconcile the growth metrics with financial performance. These are not failures of intelligence, they are failures of translation. Finance, we have our own language, and too often we expect the non-finance leaders to learn it through fragments. We expect them to learn it through board decks, investor meetings, audit reviews. That's all backwards. There's senior leaders that deserve systematic education in the finance topics that shape their strategic choices. Not so that they become CFOs, but so they can think alongside finance as true partners in building companies. This platform is my attempt to provide that education at depth and at scale, and with the systems thinking lens that I believe transforms finance from gatekeeper to strategic enabler. And one last thing, the content here reflects 25 years of operational experience, but it should not be construed as accounting, legal, or financial advice for your specific situation. Every company's context is unique. Regulations evolve. Best practices often differ by industry, by stage, by geography. So always consult qualified professionals, CPAs, attorneys, financial advisors before making decisions that affect your business. My role here is simply to educate and illuminate, not to prescribe. I aim to give you the frameworks to ask those questions, better questions, and the context to evaluate the answers that you receive from your own advisors. You know, finance doesn't have to be opaque. Systems don't have to be mysterious. And with the right frameworks and sufficient depth, any senior leader can develop the finance fluency to make better strategic decisions. So that's what I'm here to help you build. Welcome to the journey. There'll be a number of videos and number of topics, and your job is to connect the points. My life has been all about connecting the points backward, not going forward. So I'm threading all of those points using my experience, using my education, using all the books that I've read to create this synthesis. And the platform is all about creating a synthesis and using it as a springboard for you to understand the world of finance and how it operates. Thank you for your time. Take care. Enjoy the sessions. Bye-bye.